the former mayor of Washington, D.C., Anthony Williams, who presided over a great renaissance of our capital city in the United States. Please welcome Mayor Anthony Williams.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Niels. And thank all of you for having me, to all the excellencies who are here, the dignitaries, and all of us who are not dignitaries. I want to share with you my experiences in Washington, D.C., personally as mayor of the city of Washington, D.C., share with you my experiences as an individual and my experiences as a mayor. As a mayor, you're not an expert. You're not an official prognosticator of any of the fields that we're talking about. It's your job as a mayor to take a vision and transform a vision into reality. You know, there's the old Japanese proverb that a vision without implementation is a daydream, and a lot of implementation without a vision is a nightmare. So your job as a mayor is to try to link those two together. And I came to my job as a mayor as a bureaucrat. People affectionately say I served in a number of different governments around the United States in economic development and in finance, in the federal government, the state government, the local government, then became mayor, and it gave me that variety of experiences, I think a unique perspective on our nation's capital at a very, very difficult period in our nation's capital's history. When I say our nation, I'm speaking of the United States, obviously. Now, you might ask, how can a mayor of Washington, D.C. Presume to say anything about a huge, glorious mess, and I say that as a compliment, that's the city of São Paulo, that sprawls on and on forever, that's defied all attempts at planning. Here I am standing as a former mayor of Washington, D.C., which is one of the best or worst examples, however you look at it, of planning in the world today. It's a specifically planned city. It didn't really exist before the year 1800. How can I come and presume to say anything about the city of São Paulo? How can I, as a former mayor of a city of 68 square miles and around 600,000 people, and that's being generous, presume to say anything about a city approaching 20 million, a city and metropolitan region approaching 20 million people? Well, there are some perspectives, I think, that are relevant here, and I'd like to share them with you. One, I would direct your attention to our friend and colleague in the urban age diaspora, Bruce Katz, who is a fellow at the Brookings Institution, one of the colleagues here at the Urban Age, who has done a masterful work called A Region Divided, and he expanded on that to really talk about divided cities and regions in the United States. And he talked about regions and cities in the United States divided by income, by class, and by race. Now, you know one of the most divided regions and cities in the United States? Washington, D.C. So as mayor of Washington, D.C., I presided at the center of a region struggling to make its way in these global circuits that Saskia talks about, right? But that it was a region that had the most knowledgeable set of workers and elites in the United States, and a city struggling with one of the highest rates of illiteracy in the United States, one of the richest populations in the United States, and the highest concentration of poverty in the United States. So that's number one. And number two, a city that, as I transited out of my role as finance director, CFO, we call it, chief financial officer for the city, to mayor of the city, and this is apropos for the occasion, as we've heard with the previous speakers, was struggling with insolvency and bankruptcy, a debt of around $600 to $700 million that we've managed to now turn into a cumulative surplus. And I think that there is a relevance there. I think a lot of us, when we hear the previous discussion, I think all of us feel like, you know, the old saying, in my country, in Seattle, right after the Vietnam War, there was a huge contraction in aerospace and defense, and the Boeing company, which is a big, manufacturing firm in the aerospace line, went into a severe contraction, and so the city of Seattle and the region, heavily dependent on manufacturing, suffered a similar fate. And at the depths of this recession, there was a sign on I-5 outside of Seattle saying, well, the last person leaving Seattle, please turn off the lights. So I think after listening to that discussion, I think a lot of us are prepared to say, well, the last person leaving our cities, please turn off the lights. I would like to tell you, as a mayor of a city, you have a lot of different jobs. A lot of us are tempted as mayors of a city to build a beautiful city. This is an elusive dream. I don't think there's any such thing as a beautiful city. I don't think there's any such thing as reaching an ideal, but I do think very emphatically there's something such as a resilient city. And just in my time with the urban age and in my own personal reading and experience, we've seen cities that have been devastated by terrorism, by bombing, by hurricanes, and by floods, and these cities have survived. So yes, as Betty Davis would say in the movie All About Eve, buckle your seatbelts, or in for a bumpy ride. This economy is going to be bumpy, and I think we're only at the beginning of the beginning, and we don't know the effect it will have on our cities. I can't emphasize that more, but I would also emphasize that our cities are resilient, and it's our job as mayors to use our explicit as well as our apparent authority to rally our city and to make sure that our cities and our people prevail in these very, very difficult times, which brings me to my first point, and that is when we talk about our cities and the impact that our cities play, mayors have very, very different roles, a number of different roles. They are chief custodian of the city. They're the chief engineer of the city. They have all these different roles. But the most important role that a mayor has is I would describe it as the defender of the public realm. The public realm is making sure that wealth passes from one generation from another. The public realm is obviously and conspicuously our public spaces. The public realm, as Enrique Peñalosa would describe it, is making sure that the public interest is not subjected by the private interest. That's what the public realm is, and defending the public realm means very importantly and urgently balancing the inclusiveness that must be our cities and the order and the settled expectations that allow that freedom and that mobility. What we managed to do in our city was very, very important in two different levels. One, it was rebuilding trust and respect for government, and I can't really go into this at any length because I'm limited in my time. But you have to understand that when I became mayor of my city, there really was no mayor's office. There was literally zero expectation on what my government could do. So everything that I talked about was predicated first and foremost in rallying my people in a series of what we called citizen summits of 4,000 or 5,000 people every 2 years, rallying them around a vision, producing short-term results that build credibility for the government, and then making sure that we delivered services throughout our city, the poorest region of our city, receiving the same services with the same responsiveness and the same expectation as the richest region of our city. And number two, finding symbolic projects that were about inclusiveness, that were about people belonging, that were about stakeholdership. And the most important of them were a series of projects that we call in our country and in my city, Hope 6. I mentioned Bruce Katz and his time working in the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They developed a way to take housing reservations or housing estates or housing projects that were exclusively low-income, high-density, poorly managed, low-income projects and make them into living, breathing communities of mixed incomes where people were able to live in a real community knitted into the fabric of the city. We managed to not only do 6 of these projects, but we actually managed under our own power to begin 3 more of these projects. One of them in an area called Sursum Corda, now called Northwest 1. We were able to take a murder rate for the percentage of population, it was something like 30%, and bring it down to 0 by rebuilding this community. Another example of this is something you'll hear about later in the conference, the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative, where I use my bully pulpit as mayor. It is true that as a mayor, if you say the same thing over and over, let me back up. If you pick out of all your universe of potential objectives and goals, 3 goals, and you slavishly, relentlessly hang on and pursue these goals and talk about these goals to almost the exclusion of everything else, after a while, believe it or not, it actually sinks in. So when I became mayor, I started talking about the Anacostia River. No one even knew what I was talking about. Most people didn't even know where the Anacostia River was. The Anacostia River was an important focal point in what I'm talking about. When I talk about Bruce Katz and a region divided, if you talked about the dividing line of the region and of the city, by income, by race, by class, by everything else, it actually happened to be the Anacostia River. So by rallying attention and focus on the Anacostia River, we were actually able to build this sense that this city was one city, this city was about all of our people, and that we actually could see positive solutions. Now, let me wrap up by being presumptuous and offering a suggestion to the great people of São Paulo. You know, I mentioned all these movies, and I don't want to be hokey, but there's another great American movie, It's a Wonderful Life. And in this American movie, Jimmy Stewart, the actor, is in this small town. He's about ready to jump off a bridge because he feels his life's been in vain. He's no more reason to live, and he's ready to jump off the bridge. And an angel comes down to him, and he shows him all the wonderful things that he has going for him and all the wonderful things that he's done. I would say to you, the Paulistanos, you're standing here on this bridge. You're ready to jump off because you're doing some, frankly, dumb things that we've done in my country. Please don't do these things. Understand the wonderful assets that you have in your city. You have a fantastic city. It's an energetic, vibrant, powerful city. And one of the most important things you have in your city is your downtown, your center, that's been abandoned. One of the greatest things that you could do would be to, number one, invite an international, and using modern technology you can do this, and Barack Obama can show you how. Using modern technology, bring in people from around the world. Use the urban age as a starting point, but bring people from around the world, invite them to help you develop a symbolic project in the center of your city that's about a mix of incomes, a mix of classes, a mix of units, a mix of uses that shows São Paulo is back because our core is back. This city is resilient. This city can live. The public realm will survive. Thank you all very much.